Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Dram Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Okay, so this week we've escaped the land of Oz. Yes, we've the world tour has made it to Europe and Germany to be precise, and to be even more precise, southern Germany, Bavaria in actual fact. And today we'll be looking at the range of Slyrs. Now, it was interesting that in the last World Whisky Awards, in the final round of judging in London back in February of this year, I was sat next to a guy from Slyrs who was telling me some interesting stuff about the distillery and promised to send me a load of samples, and funnily enough never did. But anyway, as you know, these World Tour episodes of the show are all being made up of samples that I tasted for the 2014 World Whisky Awards, and luckily enough they put in their entire range. So we're going to have a really good look at this particular distillery. But before we start, a quick announcement. As you know, the tasting evenings that we have in the shop, the next two are completely sold out. The American whiskey tasting, which we're going to be doing on Wednesday, and the Morrison and Mackay or Carn Moor tasting that we have planned for October, both of which have now completely sold out. So we thought, as there's obviously demand for it, we're putting on another tasting. So we'll be having a rum tasting in the shop on the 13th. You can purchase the tickets on the website, usual price, usual place, and hopefully should be some good fun. So that, like I said, is happening on the 13th of September. So anyway, back to this afternoon's tasting. Now, the distillery itself was, or should we say, the Slyrs whiskey was originally distilled at the Latin Hammer Distillery, which is located by the, now I'm probably going to pronounce this horribly wrong, so apologies to you that may be watching in Germany, Sheila Sea Lake in Bavaria. And so the distillery was founded in 1999 and produces a range of spirits, I believe, from sort of vodka and so on and so forth. And in 2007 the distillery moved to they built a purpose-built whiskey distillery not far in Newhouse. Well, it's a nice looking distillery, it has to be said. And like I said, there's some interesting things about the Slyrs whiskey, in that the malt comes from Bavaria. They basically wanted to keep everything obviously as focused on the region as possible, which is why they don't do a peated malt, because apparently there's no peat bogs in that part of Bavaria. So they wanted to kind of stick to the, like I said, creating a Bavarian single malt rather than something that apes Scotch malt, for argument's sake. They have quite a long fermentation period of around about a week, or 7 days I should say. So I'm guessing that what they're attempting to achieve is obviously quite a fruity estery wort to sort of kick off with. It is mashed, and the final wort comes out about sort of 6%. Now, then obviously we move on to the distillation, and they've got some quite interesting looking stills. I mean, there's 3 stills, and to me they kind of, I don't know whether they're Holstein stills. I would probably guess that they probably are. I mean, again, you know, it's in Germany, so it probably makes sense to have your stills built in Germany. And they kind of resemble a sort of, maybe to me, a cross between a sort of an eau de vie and a cognac still. If you look at the opening picture, you might just about make out the stills in the background, but certainly you can go on their website and have a look at the stills, and they have a sort of a cognac-esque kind of boil ball, and an interesting, very small linarm, which is sort of bow-shaped, which I think is quite interesting. So what I'm guessing they're probably aiming for is quite a fruity new make spirit with a fair bit of weight. I mean, you will get obviously a reasonable amount of reflux from obviously having a very small linarm and this sort of fairly biggish kind of boil ball, but then the ball itself is not particularly long, and neither appears that the linarms appear to be particularly long. So I'm guessing that you will get, you know, a sort of, like I said, a medium weight kind of fairly fruity spirit. So hopefully when we taste the range, and we've obviously got the American oak aged version and their wood finishes, we'll hopefully sort of see if that is indeed the case. So two of the stills are used as wash stills, with one being used as a spirit still. They have a capacity of 1,500 litres, and the first run comes off at about 30% ABV, and the final run comes off at around about 70, which is actually quite high. And another interesting thing about the distillery is that they don't reuse the feints and the foreshorts, which I find quite strange. I mean, so again, they're obviously aiming for as pure a quality spirit without too much impurities, and I'm guessing this is why they obviously bottle at a young age. That certainly the American oak aged bottling is bottled at 3 years of age, and I believe and the wood finishes are aged for around about a year. Some I think the PX is slightly less than a year. The others tend to be about sort of like 12 to 14 months. So all the barrels, or all the American oak barrels, are bought in brand new. So it's virgin oak 225 litre barrels, and then, like I said, they have this range of finishes. So I think this could be interesting. It'll certainly be interesting to see, for a start, what the character of the spirit is, if it is in the style that one would assume it would be from given the setup, and how much influence the actual finishing casks have. Because if you look at the samples, I don't know whether you can actually fully see them, the colour of all these wood finishes are actually very similar, and yet they're all finished in different casks. So I believe, I don't know what or which Spanish bodega they have a relationship with, but if they buy all their American oak casks fully assembled, so I'm guessing that they probably buy all their sherry casks fully assembled as well. So so that's a very short and potted history, and to be honest with you, it's very difficult finding information about the distillery because pretty much all of it's in German, funnily enough, but I did manage to track down one that was in English. So there you have it. Like I said, if you want to find out some more information, it is out there, but I guess now it's time to have a look at the range. Okay, so like I said, we're going to kick off with the Slyrs Bavarian Malt. This is a 3-year-old. It was distilled in 2011, bottled in 2014, this particular one. Like I said, aged in virgin American oak, and bottled at 43%. This, because of all the different wood finishes, it was a bit of a guessing game as to which way round to do them, but I thought we'd kick off the wood finishes with the Sauternes finish. Again, 3 years in American oak, about a year or so in ex-Sauternes cask, bottled at 46%. The second one we're going to be looking at is the Montillado finish. So again, 3-year-old, 3 years in American oak, with around about 12 to 14 months in ex-Amontillado cask. So it could be interesting. You don't see too many Amontillado cask used, and I'm surprised they don't do a Fino one actually. I would have thought that would have been ideal for being slightly different, but they don't, as far as I'm aware. The next one we'll be looking at is the Oloroso finish. Same same aging and same bottling ABV. And then the penultimate one we'll be looking at is the PX cask. Now, I'm surprised at how light the colour is. If you can see, it's very similar to the others. So, and I believe, like I said, this one doesn't quite have a year aging. So obviously they're not aiming for a sort of a really dark, overly PX'd character whiskey. So again, it will be interesting to see what that one is like. And finally, it's the port finish. So again, like I said, same ABV, same aging process, and hey, I'm looking at that, I wouldn't have picked that for a port finish. I mean, there's no redness, no tawny kind of hue or anything like that. In actual fact, it looks pretty much like all the rest, all the sherry cask finishes. But we shall see if that is indeed the case when we get there. So yeah, this I think is going to be a really interesting tasting for those of you with actually, well, long memories, or can be bothered to sort of scroll back through the 200 odd episodes I've done. I did do an episode, I think it was last year or possibly the year before, on European whiskies, and included one of the Slyrs bottlings. I forget which one it was now, but maybe, hopefully, the review will be pretty much the same. And while we're on the process of talking about European whiskies, it turns out that, if you remember, I think at the same time I was showing the two Italian whiskies, the Puni Alba and the other one, whose name eludes me now, for Nova. Well, they've now actually got a distribution deal in the UK, and out of the blue I got an email from the distributors saying, I'm distributing these whiskies, yada yada yada, and I said, oh, I know them. So yes, we'll be stocking them. Again, like most of the sort of Scandinavian European whiskies, they're not exactly cheap for what they are. They will retail between sort of like about 55 and 60 odd pounds for the two bottlings, but I think they're definitely going to be worth a try. But anyway, I digress. I think it's time to taste the first whiskey. Right, okay, so let's kick off with the Bavarian malt, 3 years in American, or brand new American oak. Let's see what the nose gives us. Quite a lot of oak, which is not a surprise. Quite sort of vanillaed and chunky. There is a fairly estery kind of fruity spirit beneath. There's a touch of citrus, there's a little bit of almost kind of rye-like herbs, and I believe they do actually use or do produce a rye, and this certainly has a kind of rye kind of like feel to it. It's got an edginess, a citricness. It's young. The oak kind of settles down a little bit, it has to be said, and the spirit kind of starts to sort of come through, and it is quite estery. I mean, it's not overtly fruity. I'm not getting sort of huge amounts of apricot, pineapple, banana, those kind of sort of aromas that you would associate with quite an estery malt. But it has some pleasant barley notes. There's a touch of honey, like I said. It's not so bad for such a young whiskey, it has to be said. Let's see what palate's like. Young, edgy, taut, barley. The oak sort of kind of comes through right on the finish, and it's got that kind of taut sort of alcohol stroke citric character on the middle, which kind of stops the oak sort of really getting going, which, yeah, you may well agree is probably not such a bad thing. You don't want the sort of the oak to be overly dominant, and obviously new American oak can be like that. It's a little bit on the short side, it has to be said. Pleasantly balanced. There's a sweetness there, a honeyed sweetness. From reading my notes when I tasted it for the blind, I I did ask the question whether this had possibly been rum finished, although there's a little bit of dried fruit, but sort of certainly now I've kind of tasted it again. I don't, I wouldn't kind of stand by that kind of conclusion. It's certainly a young whiskey. It's got some charm, it has to be said. It's young, fresh, and yeah, okay. I can like that. That's pleasant. Right, okay, so let's move on to the first of the finishes. This is the Sauternes finish. This is the sherry finish edition number 2. They're all numbered. I don't know whether that's how they release them, or whether they're doing sort of like, this is the first release of the Sauternes, this is the second release. That I honestly don't know. But anyway, so this is the sherry finish number 2. Sherry finish, wine finish number 2. It's not sherry, it's Sauternes. So anyway, let's see what the nose gives. Oily, a little bit dumbed, quite honeyed. There's a slight sort of, toasted caramel note in the background. Again, it feels a little bit younger actually. There's a more oiliness, there's a slightly more, not faintiness, but that kind of slightly off the stilly kind of note. Cereally, that sort of slightly burnish caramel note is becoming a little bit more noticeable. A little bit of herbs. Yeah, I mean, it's not too badly balanced. It's okay. It's a bit. There's a bit of polish to it, I suppose. Certainly, the honey is starting to come out a little bit more over time, and it's certainly got that Sauternes-y kind of sweetness. So I'm not getting the kind of I normally get with Sauternes finishes, sort of more of a grapey sweetness. I must admit, I'm not getting so much of that kind of grapiness on this, but it's okay. Let's see what the palate's like. Very heavy on the oak. I'm getting a lot of American oak. I'm getting a lot of honey and wood and Sauternes, a little bit of dried fruit. I'm not getting any of the sort of fresh, the citrus. I'm not getting much of the sort of kind of the fruit from the actual spirit. It is very much more cask orientated on the palate. It's pleasant, it's full, it's maybe a little bit longer, but that's possibly more to do with the sort of the honeyed element coming from the Sauternes. So okay, yeah, I don't think it's kind of setting my world on fire, shall we say, but I think it's certainly it's a solid whiskey, I think. Right, okay, so let's have a look at the Amontillado. I like to see different types of sherry casks used rather than the ubiquitous Oloroso. I like to see sort of Fino sherry cask and finishes and Oloroso, Montillado. Because I mean, I like a Montillado whiskey. It has that sort of lovely kind of nutty, grapey kind of character, which often follows through onto the whiskey. So let's see if this one does. It's quite edgy, herbal. I must admit, I'm not getting a lot of kind of nuttiness. It's possible there's a little bit there. Again, there's a little bit of barley. The balance is just about okay, I guess. There's a little bit of wininess, a little bit of winey dried fruit. Yeah, it's okay. There's a little bit of a herbal note, a bit of barley. I guess that it's probably not too badly balanced. Just sort of like having a look at. I didn't really give it too high mark when I tasted it. there's a little bit of a, like I said, an edginess to it. Not quite sort of cardboardy, but it's not quite industrial, but it's got that sort of somewhere between the two kind of feelings. Yeah, okay, I can live with this one. This is, like I said, I'd like to have probably seen a bit more kind of nuttiness, but I think on the whole, the balance is not too bad. Let's see what the palate gives. It's a bit dry, it's a bit austere, that kind of earthy, sort of slightly industrial note is kind of coming through. Maybe that cask wasn't quite 100% clean, possibly, because I don't really think that kind of industrial note certainly is coming from the spirit. I mean, as we've seen from the spirit, it's got a lovely sort of, you know, freshish, sort of citrusy kind of character. But there's a kind of a bit of an edge that I'm not really enjoying. There's a bit of a grapiness on the finish, maybe a little bit of nuttiness. Again, like I said, I'm not getting a huge amount of kind of spirit character. So yeah, I think that the kind of for me on the palate, the jury's a little bit out on that one. It's not certainly one that I'm warming to. I think the nose was a little bit more interesting, but like I said, it kind of hinted at the slightly sort of off character that certainly kind of came through on the palate. So I think we'll move on. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Oloroso. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Now that's more herbal, Oloroso-y, pretty kind of obvious nose. Again, there's a little bit of a off note sort of just in the background. Again, quite grapey, winey, a little bit hard. It's certainly not got the sort of like the big treacle and all that kind of richness that you often get with Oloroso. It's got more of a kind of refilly Oloroso kind of feel, that sort of more herbally kind of burnt earth kind of. Yeah, again, I'm finding it difficult to warm to it. I don't think it's kind of as bad as well, that's bad. That's the wrong way of saying. I don't think. I think I was a lot harsher on it, possibly when I was tasting it for the World Whisky Awards. Yeah, I mean, it's got some. It's got some pluses and some minuses, I think. I think it's probably the best way of saying it. I mean, yes, there's some nice kind of lighter, sort of grapey, sort of fruity kind of notes, but there's that slight sort of hardness as well. I think it's one of those sort of whiskies that you either love this kind of style, or you're kind of like slightly ambivalent about it. Anyway, let's see what the palate's like. It's hard, grapey. There is a little bit of a blemish there, I think. I'm certainly getting a slightly dirty sulphury kind of note right on the finish. It's drying, it's slightly bitter, it's almost got like a green tannic kind of feel to it, and it feels quite industrial. Again, I think this, I don't know whether these, I don't think these are single cask bottlings. I think these are obviously I would imagine batch bottlings, and I think a rogue sort of slightly blemished cask has obviously crept in here, shall we say, and this is always going to be an issue when you play with fire, shall we say, when you use sherried butts. And for the life of me, I still can't understand why they still use sulphur candles. I mean, a lot of the sherry bodegas kind of claim now that they no longer use sherry candles. They don't use the the traditional method of fumigating casks, and yet when I spoke to an insider in the sherry industry some years ago and asked him whether that's still carried on, he just went, "Yep, it's still widely practiced. Maybe it's because it's heritage, who knows?" But to me, I asked the question, there must be some other way of fumigating your cask, which means, you don't have to put a burning sulphur candle in there and it spits sulphur. I mean, even I guess using sort of like sulphur dioxide gas is going to sort of be slightly problematic, because the sulphur could absorb into the wood, although they do use that technique in the winemaking industry, and you very rarely come across a sort of sulphured wine. Yes, okay, you maybe get a bit of a sort of whiff of sulphur when you first open a bottle, but that's more to do with the sulphur dioxide that's been used to clean the bottles, and it tends to blow off, and it doesn't tend to ruin the wine. But in the whiskey industry, there still seems to be this problem with tainted casks. I don't think it's obviously as endemic as possibly it used to be, but I mean, when you've got distilleries that are either sort of seasoning their own casks, or they're shipping casks with transit alcohol in or stuff like that, they're doing all these things to avoid the having to use sulphur. And I really think that if you're going to sort of spend good money on sherry casks, which are not cheap, you may as well spend a few extra euros or whatever on travelling alcohol or something like that, or buy a vat of bloody sherry and do it yourself. At least you've then got full control over it. You just literally empty the cask out of sherry and put your whiskey in there, and there's no need for fumigation or anything like that. But anyway, so yeah, I think, like I said, I think a rogue cask has kind of slipped into the Oloroso bottling. Right, okay, so let's move on to the PX. Let's see what this one gives us then, shall we? Again, there is a slight edginess to it, but it's got coffee, a little bit of treacle, dried fruits, a little bit of darker honey. In actual fact, I quite like this one. I think this, so far, of the three sherry finishes, I think this is certainly the one that I personally prefer. There's a little bit of nuttiness, there's a touch of barley. I mean, I'm guessing because they don't age it or finish it for quite so long, because they don't want to sort of overtly sort of swamp it with the PX kind of character, you're actually getting a little bit slightly better balance to the whiskey. And I'm certainly getting more barley character. There's certainly more of the sort of underlying sort of fresh citric if that's actually a word, citric notes from the actual spirit. And I think that the thing is that this is a lot cleaner, so there's certainly no rogue butts have got in here, shall we say. So in actual fact, yeah, I quite like this. It's got a nice sweetness. It's balanced. Yeah, yeah, not too bad at all. Let's see what the palate's like. There's a little bit of a hardness to it, but I think the PX is giving it that sort of more treacly kind of character. It's a lot more mouth-watering, it's longer, it's fuller. And to me, although there's a little bit of dryness on the finish, it's not too bitter. There's no off notes. I think this is certainly, for me, the most impressive of the sherry finishes that they released in, I would guess, 2014. Quite full, And I'm not the world's biggest lover of PX finishes at all. I mean, I find them very, very sweet and overly treacly and overly rich. And so in actual fact, I think this is probably my favourite so far. I think the balance is a lot better. Yeah, okay, I'm getting not so much kind of distillery character. I'm not getting much more of the barley on the palate. It's more kind of, you know, sherry focused, but it's clean, it's longer, it's fuller, it's got a little bit more sweetness, a bit more balance to it. So yeah, I think that one's not too bad at all. Right, okay, and finally we're on to the port finish. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Again, we've got a bit of hardness going on, a little bit of industrialness. There's some really quite syrupy, peppery fruit underneath. That syrup is starting to kind of become a bit more noticeable, shall we say. Again, there's a sort of an edginess to it, and this time the edginess I think is more coming from the spirit than the actual cask itself. There's a sort of, I mean, again, the balance is not too bad. I mean, certainly you are getting some, you know, spirit character kind of coming through. It's not all about big port spice and what have you. There's a touch of coffee. Yeah, I mean, it's, again, I'm finding it difficult to kind of warm to it. It's just got that kind of edge to it. I mean, I suppose if, for example, they used peated malt, which they wouldn't, that kind of edge sort of might be masked a little bit by the sort of the peat, and or might kind of work in with it. I've certainly known whiskies that kind of work kind of that way, but yeah, I think the balance is right. I think they're obviously, you know, not overdoing the finish at all. It's just, like I said, there's a sort of slight roughness there, which, again, you know, maybe your cup of tea. You know, it's like I said, I'm not saying it's a fault. It's just the way it kind of comes across. But anyway, let's see what the palate's like. Again, it's quite hard. There is some juicy sort of syrup coated black fruit. It's a bit short. It's a bit overtly alcoholic. I mean, or not overly. I'm just noticing the alcohol a little bit more than I have done on the other bottlings. There's a bit of greenness on the finish, almost like kind of underripe grapes, sort of, you know, that kind of stalky green kind of character. There's some nice peppery notes. Like I said, there's some dried fruit, some sort of black fruits. But again, it's a bit short. It's a bit sort of drying, a bit kind of, you know. It's again, it's okay. It's just sort of like, you know. Okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show up. Well, I think it's a mixed bunch, it has to be said. I think I quite like the sort of the American oak aged Slyrs. I can see what they're kind of getting at. I know that they have released a 12-year-old, although I've not actually tasted that, and I think that would be interesting to see how that has kind of developed. But they're obviously kind of decided upon a style, a bit like Penderyn, for example. Although the distillery's been going for a lot longer, they've obviously got mature stock. They've decided that their kind of standard bottling is always going to be bottled pretty much the same kind of age statement, well, the sort of same sort of aged kind of spirit, and so they're obviously saying, right, this is kind of how we're going to do it. It's a 3-year-old spirit, and yeah, it has some attraction, it has to be said. it's got some sort of pleasant citric notes. It's kind of got some balance. It's not overly oaky. So yeah, okay, that's what they want to do. That's fine. That's I got no issue with that. The Sauternes, yeah, well, okay, it was okay. There was some honeyed notes. There was that little bit of edge to it, but I think yeah, pleasant enough. The Amontillado, probably I was hoping for a little bit more from that, it has to be said. There was again a bit of a roughness to it, which I'm guessing is probably more from the cask than the actual spirit itself. And yeah, okay, it was okay. The Oloroso, I think, was probably the weakest of them, and I think that's only because there was some a rogue or more than one rogue Salford sherry butt had kind of like crept in there, and I think that's probably just a sort of an aberration, because again, it displayed a very similar kind of balance to the others, but just that sort of sulphur note kind of I think kind of let it down. And the PX finish, I think that actually kind of worked the best, I think, for me. Again, pleasantly balanced, had a bit more length to it, a bit more sweetness. Yeah, I think that was quite an interesting one. The port, again, I kind of like sort of lumped that in with the Amontillado and the Sauternes finish. It was okay. It didn't kind of set my world on fire, it has to be said, and I think if I was evaluating them to sort of stick on the shelves, I would probably, go with, say, probably I would go with the PX and the sort of the American oak age, because I like the sort of I like the kind of style. I like what they're doing. I think, I mean, I would personally be interested in tasting something that's got a little bit more age to it, just to sort of see how the spirit interreacts with the oak, whether the oak kind of mellows out a little bit with time. You get maybe a little bit more sort of oxidation notes. I think that could be quite interesting with a bit of age, and maybe if you guys at the distillery are watching, maybe you'd kindly send me a sample of the 12-year-old. I think that would be really interesting. But like I said, I think at the end of the day, I think it's a mixed bunch. I certainly don't think the whiskey they're producing is bad. I'm certainly not going to sort of say that it's kind of blown me away. I think it's okay. I think it's all going to come down to price. If you can sort of buy these at a reasonable price, I think they're certainly going to be worth it. But I'm guessing, again, like pretty much most European and world whiskies, that once they get over here, they're going to be quite expensive. And certainly, if that is the case, I would sort of think twice before parting with big bucks for them, shall we say. But that's just me, and I think that's pretty much all that can be said. So I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode of the show. Not quite sure where we're going to be next week, but I'm sure it's going to be pretty interesting. So until then, good dramming and good afternoon.